Hey there, listener. This is Chief Marketing Officer of National Land Realty, Mac Christian. I want to take a second to thank you for listening to this podcast. This podcast has grown 4 times what it did in the first year. We're on year number 2 of this, and we just got back from our national conference for our company, and it's amazing to see a gathering of good people in one location. And I say that because there's a lot of companies out there, and it's very rare that you can look at an organization that you work with and say, I don't know everybody in the organization. We've got a lot of people here, but I can say everybody that I have talked to in this company, you can look at them, shake their hand, and look at them in the eye and say, that's a good person. And it's not very common that you can do that. And I don't throw a lot of plugs on the company in here because the whole goal of this is to give value to listeners who have land. And if you're just selling yourself the whole time, it sort of gets in the way of that. But you know what? To heck with it. I want to throw a plug on this one. This is an amazing company with an amazing culture and some of the smartest people you will ever meet when it comes to land. There are facts upon facts that I learn on a daily basis, and I try to get as much as I can into this podcast. So thank you to you listeners who enable us to grow. We can't do this kind of thing, and I can't put my time into this kind of thing unless we have listeners, and we have plenty, and we have plenty more to gain. And most of all, thank you to all of the hardworking people of National Land Realty, from everybody from the field team, meaning the real estate agents in the field, the land professionals, to the team behind the scenes that does each and everything each and every day. Everybody puts their blood, sweat, and tears into this. I can truly say nothing but amazingly good people that lean on each other and always are discussing how they can help out the best interest of the land owners, sellers, buyers, everybody out there. Thank you. And on that note, be sure to like, follow, and review this podcast, especially follow, and continue to listen. And above all, I would say share with people that you know who own land or are looking to acquire land. The educational value of this podcast is immense. So be sure to do those things for us so we can continue to do this. So anyways, I want to carry on with the show now. I am going to read this. This is where it's weird to do it on video because I do have to do this in one take. So I could stutter. Normally what I would do is get the audio done and I can mess up because I can go back and edit this. It's just a little trickier with video. So you get to see all my screw ups. I may screw up in this. It's a different kind of thing. This is the second time. This is our second episode of video. So bear with me if I do that. And I'm going to go to my reading. You'll watch my eyes glancing from side to side now. But yeah, let's kick this off. So welcome to episode number 80 of the National Land Realty Podcast. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer of National Land Realty, and I will be your host for this episode. Remember, our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. Now, what is going to happen in agricultural land values in 2024? Today, we have somebody who can give you insight for the year ahead. Dr. Gary Schnitkey is a professor in the University of Illinois College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences for agricultural and consumer economics. He is also the Soybean Industry Chair in Agricultural Strategy. Dr. Schnitkey has a Ph.D. in Agricultural Economics, a Master's in Agricultural Economics, a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Finance. Dr. Schnitkey is one of the United States' premier minds in agricultural economics, specifically in the Midwest. He has spent the last couple of decades educating farmers, ranchers, and academics on the economics of agriculture. As we find out in this episode, he's been speaking a lot less lately, which makes this interview extra special. Now, sit back and enjoy. Okay, I am sitting here again. Again, we had you on last year, and actually, so the podcast that we did with you last year was one of our highest downloaded podcasts that we did, and topically, it makes sense, right? We're talking about the projections for the year ahead, what we're looking at economically, and Dr. Gary Schnitkey is one of the leading minds behind that sort of thing. So we have here a professor of agricultural and consumer economics, chair in agricultural strategy. You also work with Soybean Industries. Um, Tell us a little bit about sort of what you do. Just it's better to hear it from you. On the daily and some of your background and how you started working with your current position.
Yeah, so I'm currently a professor in farm management here at the University of Illinois in the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Economics Department. I got here by growing up on a farm in Northwest Ohio and actually wanted to be a farmer at one point in my life, but academics has treated me pretty well. So I kept going and got a Ph.D. and was at Ohio State on faculty for a while doing dairy farm management. But I've been back here since 1998. And what I do is spend most of my teaching, research, and extension time looking at the economics of grain farms in the Midwest. That branches off into Brazil because of Brazil's importance in the world soybean and increasingly corn markets. And look at conservation practices, risk management practices, crop insurance, and farmland prices because they're very important in this whole matter. So that's how I got here.
Excellent. And so last year when we talked, I love being able to circle back around on something like this because it makes you look really good, right? Because our projections were due to the price of inputs and due to the limited inventories that you're seeing on the marketplace and just the general economics of agriculture that we would see not a disaster in land prices. We would not see an increase in land prices. What we were probably looking at is more of a plateau that would hold for the majority of 2023. And dare I say, it looks like you might have been right. So
Yeah, that you got to bring those up when you get them right.
you gotta do some crowing when you get those things right. So see.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so that's the conversation that we're going to kind of dive into now. What are we looking at with the price of inputs for 2024? Are we looking for that high price to hold? And does it stem from, what we were looking at in 2023 is fuel, particularly natural gas, was holding fairly high. That was offsetting down the chain for fertilizers and things like that. So is that similar to what we're looking at in 2024? Or are we looking at possibly some relief?
Yeah, we're looking at some relief in fertilizer, and actually, natural gas has fallen quite a bit since last year. Um, Fertilizers, and in particular nitrogen, have fallen. We were looking at anhydrous ammonia being at above $1,200 per ton throughout early last year, and now it's sort of in the $700 to $800 per ton range. So that's a considerable fall. Uh, we're seeing some relief on the crop input side. Fertilizers probably come down, pesticides down a bit, but not as much as some of the fertilizers. And seeds basically holding steady and perhaps going up. So we are seeing relief, but we're still looking at cost levels at being pretty high levels, at least pre 2000. So before and after that date, the cost have changed quite remarkably.
How has supply chain influenced the cost of inputs over the last year and into 2024? And by supply chain, the biggest one of that is going to be your transport fuel costs. Um,
Yeah.
there's going to be that, and there's going to be, just general housing and the the supply chain kind of logistics side of it, but I think the fuel is one of the biggest ones we look at there. What has that done to impact pricing, and will that play a role?
Yeah, so the supply chain, I would say, actually, from delivering product, has held up extremely well. We were really concerned about that throughout COVID, throughout and the Ukraine Russia war, obviously impacted that quite those prices as well. The supply chain is delivering, but the costs are higher, right? It's not only fuel, it's labor, it's getting truck drivers, it's getting the whole nine yards, and so we would expect the supply input supplies to be delivered in a timely manner, but those being at higher cost. And actually, I personally don't see that ever going back to pre 2000 levels because fuels, well, who knows what fuels are, but we have a little conflict going on in the Middle East that could spread out, so that wouldn't be a great thing for fuel costs. But the labor side of it and finding employees to move the transportation and the that sort of thing, that's going to be tight forever, right? We seem to have a new labor shortages, and I don't see those going away.
Yeah, is that something that's influencing sort of how pricing has been set as far as agricultural products, the labor? Because I mean, labor struggles have it. I want to say they really kicked off, right when we had COVID. There was all kinds of names for what we were looking at in employment, and the Great Resignation was one of the terms thrown around. But it's just been harder to find labor. Is that something that's carrying on through 2024?
So yes, it is.
Yeah.
And every farmer has trouble finding employees, and finding CDLs out there is just difficult. Machinery manufacturers have raised prices tremendously, and their labor costs have went up. And finding, like mechanics and technicians for implement dealers is just hard. So if you want to be young again and go into those markets, there are jobs there.
Yeah, and it's I like being able to ask somebody smarter than me. When we're looking at the economics of the situation, is that a downstream result of inflation that we're looking at there, whereby price of goods has gone up, so the required cost of hiring somebody, people require more money to work because goods have gone up? Is that what we're looking at there? Is it sort of an inflationary thing, or is this something else, like just a standard of living thing?
So inflation plays a role in that, obviously, and once an inflationary spiral starts, it's hard to slow that down. But the other part is just a supply issue, and we've demographically, there's far fewer young people coming on, and then there's baby boomers reaching that retirement age. So we're looking at just a constriction of labor. We have an immigration policy that limits immigration into this country, and whatever you think about that, that does constrict labor supply. So goods will cost more.
And you were talking about another conflict brewing, which is Iran, or we're calling it offshoot, cells in Jordan, taking pot shots at the U.S. that is creating conflict. You think that is something to keep an eye on regarding fuel prices? Because if we head into conflict with Iran, obviously that's going to be under threat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, the Gaza, Palestinian, Israel conflict in and of itself probably wouldn't impact fuel because they're away from the sources, but a wider conflict would. And all you have to do is go back to the 1970s. The Yom Kippur War started off our oil shortage. And again, I don't think that would happen again because we now produce much more of our crude in North America. But if you take off that area, and you would make things more costly. So yeah, that is it's a something to keep an eye on. Conflicts don't make commodities cheaper. So there you go.
Yeah, and we talked last year about the conflict in Ukraine. Uh, the overall change there has been very minimal, right? Over the last year, it's still an area of high conflict. In how is that influencing global supply chains over the last year, and what do we expect over 2024? And I realize we can't project really how conflict is going to go, but as far as the impact globally, and we can talk specifically to agriculture, are we seeing anything change, or are we seeing probably more of the same?
So the Ukraine Russia conflict caused shortages of grains, in particular from Ukraine moving out. That caused a big spike in prices for the past year or so. Um, but at the same time, other areas began growing more grain, including Brazil. So it's sort of rewired the way grain moves around the world. And some areas that were less involved in grain became more, not grew more. Brazil produced more grain because of the conflict than would have been without that case. So we've gotten sort of used to the conflict unless it gets bigger again and somehow also involves Russia and maybe Europe to a larger degree. But if this conflict just keeps going the way it is, sort of, you know, not that we've rewired the system and we can handle it now. So that isn't going to increase our grain prices the next year.
Is there something to pay attention to within this where you have other agricultural areas, like you mentioned Brazil, that have started increasing output, and I'm guessing probably particularly in barley is one of the big ones that comes out of Ukraine, where let's say the conflict ends in, we'll say in the next 2 years, right? Because we just don't know.
Mhm.
Is there a risk of that where Ukraine starts ramping up again and bumping out their product on a consistent basis, where all these other areas that have reallocated what they're growing, you're looking at the possibility of the price dropping through the floor because of the supply? Is that a possibility that could people need to look at for impact?
Yeah, I mean, and again, take Ukraine, Russia, and the conflict. Ukraine begins producing at normal levels again. Uh, Brazil is consistently moving pasture to grainland and it doesn't move back easily. So all of a sudden, you get the grains in production there. And there is a case where you could see oversupply, particularly if we have good weather in in uh, in uh, in Brazil or South America and North America. So, the other thing that sort of went on is last year we in North America had trend yields, which wasn't what we could have had. And Brazil was in the midst of a drought, or particular southern Brazil and Argentina. And now we're sort of moving back to normal. So we could see some increases in supply from North and South America. So all of those things, if you're looking at it right now, you would say there's a chance that we're going to see grain prices at the levels that they're at now, or maybe even lower. Um, so, yeah.
So when the big question at hand is going to be the value of land, just because of what we do. Um, Tell us a little bit about what we talked about a plateau early last year. from your perspective, and I have me walking in here saying like, oh yeah, we were kind of right. Tell me how that played out last year, and sort of what that looked like as far as, and we're speaking specifically. We'll talk to your specialty area, Midwest land values. What did we see throughout 2023?
Yeah, so throughout 2023, roughly from uh, first quarter on, land prices remained relatively the same. So they've reached a plateau. Um, we're still in the Midwest. We've had some very good years in 2022, 2021, so that our Midwest farmers are in pretty good financial shape. So and so that there was a plateau. We're looking at lower incomes because of lower commodity prices, the input prices aren't coming down as fast as the commodity prices. We have a situation where we have much higher break-even prices now than before 2020. So we would sort of say you need 480 corn now to break even, and that would have been dollar lower a year ago. So everything the farm income situation was lower in 2023, but we're still in really good financial shape. And so we're coming into 2024, and uh, incomes will be lower than in 2022, 2021, and 2020, but they're still not awful. They're just lower. They won't cause farmers to increase their financial position, but they won't degrade it very much either. So you're sort of saying we're at the status quo. So we're just going to stay here and see what happens next. So if I were looking forward, I would say that where we're at in 2024 is we have higher cost, lower commodity prices, but our incomes are still positive, and generally that results in stable farmland prices. It takes a lot to cause farmland prices to move down, and you won't see that happen. You're just going to see a plateau until either something good or something bad happens, and there's and nothing really to say that either one of those things are going to happen in 2024. We're going to see a little bit of relief on the interest rate side, maybe. But
yeah, we've heard rumblings of that, right? Everyone's going to stay into the interest rates to see what people can borrow at, and that'll be heavily at play, especially when we're talking in real estate. Less so with land markets than say residential real estate, which always skews anything that you're looking at, because there's not many people that look at agricultural land values that are like we do, right? But if you're looking, at some of the larger outlets, they're very focused on residential. So you don't see a lot of the data come in on land side or agricultural land outside of academia. So we pay attention to that. So you're saying for 2024, and we spoke to this when we talked last year, where the price of inputs shot up, right? And once something goes up in just general economics, you're not going to see it drop. It's, whether it's profit lines, whether it's corporate interest or whatever, or just because the cost of the input doesn't go back down. You don't generally see a drop. So with those high cost of inputs that we saw in 2023, it's probably not going anywhere for 2024. You're not going to see a relief in fertilizer costs because there's a profit line, right? And you're going to see that remain. And so that by itself is going to stabilize the cost, the commodity prices themselves. You're not going to see a drop in corn because the cost of inputs haven't changed. And so you're going to see a stabilization in price, while a lot of people don't like that because there's been fairly high prices that people are seeing in the grocery store, right? And so you have that going on. So that sort of bottom of the chain right there, the cost of inputs has sort of stabilized the market, if I'm hearing this right.
Yeah, no, we're at a higher cost level. Prices are corn prices are 450, 480 for the coming year, and we're here. So yeah, um, there's. I mean, if we have record yields, we could see those prices come down, as is typically the case. But then we have higher yields to sort of offset that. Vice versa, if we have uh, production problems in the Midwest or North America, we could see higher prices, and that's what you're looking at right now. I guess the wild card I would say is that Middle East situation. If you're looking at that, and that could set off another. I could see that setting off another higher fuel level, and that would also probably then result in higher commodity prices. So that has a inflationary impact overall. So
Yeah, and you mentioned historical precedent. How did that what was the impact of that? Just for a refresher for anybody listening, because you mentioned this.
yeah, so the Yom Kippur War happened in the early 1970s, and we had fuel shortages. And if going back to that period, we had high levels of inflation. That was actually a pretty good time in agriculture going back there. We had some higher incomes in there that period, and that actually caused rising farmland prices until roughly the 80s. And when Paul Volcker came in and said it's time to clamp down on inflation, raising those interest rates, and that's when we saw the big decline. Again, if you're looking at where we're at, if you're using that sort of historical analogy, we're not at the point where people are talking about it raising interest rates, so we're not going to see that cause farmland prices decline. We're going to see some erosion in returns and maybe some erosion in cash rents. People are not going to be willing, at least, to see those rents go up, and they may push some of the high end down. But until there's a major reason or major financial thing that changes that, we're sort of where we are.
And you mentioned stabilization unless you said something good or something bad happens. What are some of and I realize that we're throwing crystal ball up, right? But like, what do you typically look at as, we'll just say, kind of like a leading indicator of something bad rumbling? What are some of the things that we could anticipate to look for?
So you would be concerned. The biggest concern that sort of from a bad side is China U.S. conflict, because that would likely cause reductions in soybean flows and other agriculture goods to China, which would then cause price declines here. So that's sort of the biggest bad, if you will. China are the biggest market, and, and other sort of reductions in demand around the world. The biggest good is actually, Ukraine, Russia. Wars haven't necessarily been bad if they're hitting production areas. I don't see a production area. Brazil's not, and Argentina aren't in conflict. Maybe another bad is if Argentina actually gets their inflation under control, but that doesn't seem to be. So the goods actually is some production problem outside of the United States if you're a Midwest farmer, and you don't really see that happening because Brazil and South America appear to be having a good crop. Nothing. So we're sort of here. So
Now, one of the things that we have seen over the last, and you mentioned 2021, 2022, 2023, one of the key trend that we've seen all over the place is the price of agricultural land shooting through the ceiling. We've had record sale after record sale after record sale, and I quit counting when it started hitting 24,000 an acre, and
Mhm.
in some places that sort of drastic increase, you talked to, uh, despite that, farmers are still making margin. Like they're paying that much for land and still pulling margin from their yields. Is the prop up of those kind of sky high prices? Is that creating a risk area in agricultural markets, or is that likely to be stable?
So yeah, so if we had prices of corn below $4 and price of beans below, let's say 11, we would have some downward pressure on prices. Having said that, that would also probably prompt some disaster assistance from the federal government. And it's an election year, so um, uh, so that would probably prompt that. Um, those prices are possible if we have a good year. Again, I don't. Yeah, it's you can always think of that as a crisis point and a risk. I'm not sure it's more now than it was in 2016, 2017, 2018, actually. I mean, so um, if you're looking at something that causes a break like we had in the 1980s, it's kind of hard to see.
And I think that is one of the obvious parallels that people try to have. People always look to history of like, well, this happening again. And I think, as we look through history, nothing has ever really ever happened again. Like, it's
Yeah,
an
yeah.
exact repeat. But people look to that and it spooks people. And but we've seen it's a little more stable. The situation around the land values is a little more stable than what we saw in the 80s, right?
Yeah. And again, you in the 1980s, you had what? Uh, you had a lot of debt out there, debt financing on land purchases. There's much less of that today. Much of the land that's being purchased is being purchased at modest debt levels or no debt levels at all from individuals that have had good years and have the cash to spare. So, what made the 1980s bad was that interest rates went up, people had debt, and all of a sudden the debt servicing went well above the ability of the farm to generate incomes. This time, if we see sort of a something that causes anything to happen, it's cash rents that would have to adjust down. And again, those things come down slow because farmers, I mean, anytime you're reducing cash rents, there is a risk of losing farmland out there from a farmer standpoint. And yeah, that's just hard to do. So uh, while there's debt out there, even a rise in interest rates isn't the same today as it was in the 1980s because there was much higher debt levels.
Yeah, and before I do anything else, I'm going to adjust my lighting here. I told you about the Casper the Friendly Ghost face that I have going on I had to open my blinds, and now it's the sun came out.
Mm.
I don't know if that'll change anything, but we're gonna hope. Hey, look at that! I can see my face again.
Yeah.
Um, so when we're looking at land for the up and coming 2024, uh, we're looking at stability, still high land prices, which I mean, like the key impact there is you spoke to there's less leverage on the market nowadays, which which
Mhm.
insulates from risk. And we see that all the time with land loans, even with government, backed loans that you see on the market. You're looking at 50% coverage. It's not a tremendous amount of leverage that to go into these. So it's a lot of the people acquiring land or those that already have it. It's like a 1031 exchange that they run into it, or they're expanding based on profits. You're not seeing a lot of new entry into the market because it's really expensive. And so you're not going to see sort of like this influx that you might otherwise see if land was of high value, or if land was able to be acquired at a low value. And where that's where markets grow, right? When something becomes affordable and the price drops out, then people jump in. Right now there's sort of a barrier to entry, and so you see stabilization in that area. You see stabilization in inputs. You see sort of stabilization in the actual commodities. So overall, it's kind of hit this point of equilibrium throughout 2023, 2024 that you project probably is going to go throughout 2024, right?
Yeah, I don't see anything. I see farmers coming out of 2024, their incomes are down, um, but not enough to cause major adjustments anywhere. And so we will continue um, with roughly the same cash rent levels, probably no increases, maybe a little bit downward pressure on the high end. Interest rates are stabilizing, and yeah, that it just calls for stability out there. Again, you don't see interest rates increasing, and
Hopefully.
you probably, yeah, hopefully, and you see rental rates at Midwest farmland stabilizing, but not coming down a lot until something happens.
Do you see, and we'll talk from a Midwest perspective again, any particular areas that are, and I'll say on the upside and the downside, at risk for dramatic increases in value, or areas that are at risk for dramatic decrease? Because it's state to state and region to region when you're looking at
Yeah.
are there any areas that are kind of dealing with a full hand here?
So the ones that you sort of look at and wonder about are the high productivity farmland, because that went up the most and where a lot of the records were set. Um, so that's probably where you're going to see the stability. I wouldn't again. I think we're looking at a stable situation without much chance for an upside, but there's nothing bad out there happening. So the line that increased the most was high productivity farmland in central Illinois, northeast Iowa. Um, but again, you don't; those areas aren't are also not under a lot of stress.
Yeah, and you spoke to you know, international risk. There's the possibility of China. We keep an eye on that. There's the possibility of Iran, and you're talking, one gives us the fuel for export and processing, and one does a lot of our trade with us. Like, that's part of why soybean is, I think, it's number one export that we
Mm.
have, right? It's you've got those things out there. What are things domestically that we keep an eye on? I know that like the farm bill, right, is one that's
Yeah,
been kicked down the road for months now, and you're right. It's an election year. Don't even know if you'll see momentum on the farm bill before the election.
yeah.
So, what are some domestic things? I'll do this in a two-part question because I'll still consider it domestic. Weather patterns that we're seeing throughout the U.S. over the last year. We've seen kind of a crazy winter. Are those things that could play a role as we move through 2024?
So if you were looking at a recession in the United States, that would curtail or slow down meat demand, which would then slow down demand for corn and soybeans, and that could be a negative impact. Um, I don't, I really don't see recession happening, or yeah, I mean, you can see both sides of it, but there's nothing that's saying that we're moving towards that sort of environment. I actually think we are in more of an inflationary environment than people think we are. I would disagree somewhat with the Fed that we have these things under control, but so I think we'll still see continued upward pressure on prices, and but that's not going to cause problem or not. That's not going to cause much to change in 2024. The weather patterns, actually, from a Midwest perspective, we're getting quite a bit of rain, replenishing our water supplies. So that's probably fundamentally good for us having good yields. Um, Drought has either broken or will break when it over much of the Midwest. Iowa still looks dry in the drought monitor. But overall, you would say right now, looking for a normal year for this coming year, and a normal year would be above trend yields. So, yeah, unless again, we 2023, you sort of were sitting there in the middle of it in June, saying this could be a major drought year, and then rains came and we were okay. And again, from a Midwest perspective, at least in the Eastern Corn Belt, we're getting good rains and replenishing water supplies, so we'll be okay. So some other areas of the world are, Southwest is still in drought. They don't produce much grain, so they're,
Yeah, I was going to say the Northwest we've seen drought conditions, but our main exports are we do have grain. I can't undercut that in Idaho.
Yeah, you got wheat. The wheat.
We got a lot of wheat. Dairy is
Yeah.
our big one. Dairy is by far one of the biggest. I think next up is just livestock in general, and they're grain dependent, but it's not the grain output isn't as high as what you see in the Midwest. Um, so it sounds like that, sort of an optimistic year. I want to say like it's not a plateau isn't like the hot topic at hand. People don't want to talk
Yeah.
about consistency, but that is sort of a good highlight for what we're looking forward to, right?
Yeah, I would say that. And from a farmland market standpoint, consolidating those sort of gains you had and just holding steady is probably um, a fundamentally good thing, right? You can't keep seeing the price increases that we did. Um, so, yeah, again, we're probably looking at a sort of lower income year, but nothing that would cause stress. So here we are.
I was gonna say it's lower, but not something to where like people are gonna panic and exit, and there's still
Yeah.
margin to be made there.
There's still margin to be made there, and farmers overall are in a good financial position, so they can weather some poorer times as well and still have money to buy farmland.
Yeah, yeah. So what about you for 2024? You did the last time I talked to you, you wanted to get some cabin time, and did that carry out? You going to get some more cabin time this year, or
Yeah,
are you doing a lot of presenting this year, or?
actually, I've slowed down my presenting for this year because I'm working pretty closely with Illinois Corn and a couple other organizations on looking at some economics of various cover crop tillage systems, etc. So we're getting into the carbon game and more so in figuring out what that is. I have traveled to a number of football games and been to Sedona here recently. Was over in Santa Fe, so none of that is job related. But it's good to see those areas. The South, I like I like that Arizona, New Mexico area, the high plains, or getting up there where it's a little cool. Yeah, that was fun.
Oh, do you like the New Mexico area?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's different than the Midwest,
It is
right?
very different than the Midwest. I like to joke that everything out there wants to kill you.
Yeah, that's probably true. Actually, the area that's true. Actually, that is, yeah, there is a reason why we have Midwest has below freezing weather. That kills bugs and keeps the insects away, at least some of the bad ones. But
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
I sort of want to travel some more in the interim mountain region, sort of Utah up through that area. Idaho, Idaho would be a good place to go and
You need to get out
see
here and
that
try some
area.
fly fishing.
Yeah, yeah, we don't do that here. So
So as far as you mentioned that you're kind of slowing down the presentations that you've done because you've always been really active and
yeah.
presenting to different organizations talking about grain markets. What is some of the research that you're working on that maybe people should pay attention to? You mentioned the economics of cover crops and things like that. What are some of the things that you're working on that we could expect to see from you?
So we're looking at overall what we would call conservation tillage sort of practices, which would include reduced tillage, um, cover crops, and nitrogen, actually overall fertilizer timing and rates. And part of the reason why we're doing that is because of all the conservation concerns, or excuse me, carbon sequestration, nutrient runoff, and those sorts of things. Um, and we've spent a lot of time looking at cover crops. We unfortunately don't find cover crops to be profitable without a cost share. I mean, so we have farmers doing that, and we went out and interviewed some of the farmers that are the most successful profit wise with cover crops and looked at what they did. And it's sort of interesting. It's always the same thing: keep costs low and work it into the system so that it's um, um, not difficult. I guess is the way. Cover crops is a big change in practice because you're now planting a second crop that you're not going to harvest, and you have to terminate it. All of which is more problematic than you think.
Right.
so so
So we're looking at is it in the same realm as utilizing sort of native plants in certain areas for a no-till kind of practice that sort of
yeah.
you rely on less inputs that way if you do it right. We've had a lot of conversations with a gentleman named Grant Woods that works a lot with this kind of stuff and he kind of specializes in the whole no-till approach. Is that sort of what you're looking at as far as the
Yes.
economics of this?
So just to give you a feel for this, we look at corn and soybean rotations. From corn to going into soybeans, a pretty standard practice is to, after you harvest the corn, plant cereal rye in the fall. And that plant then grows throughout the fall, but more importantly, in the spring. Uh, it overwinters very well. And then you plant soybeans. And if you work it right, you can reduce your your herbicides because the cereal rye reduces uh, does suppress weeds. The issue is is that reduction in cost from reduced herbicides doesn't cover the cost of the planting the cereal rye itself. So you have to be looking at some other gain. And even the farmers that do it believe that there are gains in conservation and soil health, broadly defined. But we have pretty good soils already, and so making those soils better will take some time to see higher yields. So it's sort of you you have cost up front to that practice.
So where's the best place that people could keep track of this research that you're doing? Is it going to be on the university
Farm Doc,
website or
yeah, keep going to Farm Doc. Farm Doc website. We put some material there already, and we'll continue to put it there. If you look management section, you'll see some of that. And then Illinois Corn is publishing it in an area called Precision Conservation Management. So Google that and you'll find work there.
Excellent, excellent. And it's, I mean, this is the approach of no-till, I know, has been growing and growing. Like, I feel like that's a really terrible pun I just threw out there, but that practice has been gaining momentum, and so you're sort of, obviously somebody like you would be on the front line of that. So it's a good thing to pay attention to. It sounds like, I don't want to say it's an exciting 2024 and jumping into that, but it does sound a really cool.
I decided to back off from my speaking a little bit, spend some time doing some research so I have something to talk about. So
you're getting your hands dirty a little bit this year.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Yeah. Well,
it's been fun.
Yeah. I was gonna say, but no, I just want to thank you again. I really appreciate your time. It's been the second time we talked now. It's been great each time. So I very, very much appreciate you taking the time here to chat with us.
It's my pleasure. You have if don't see you before, have a good year. So there you go.
Likewise. This concludes episode number 80 of the National Land Realty Podcast, discussing the economic outlook for 2024 with Dr. Gary Schnitkey of the University of Illinois. It's hard to express how great it is to talk to somebody like Dr. Schnitkey as far as his expertise and the insight that he brings. It's very, very cool to be able to meet with him 2 years in a row and get his outlook on the year ahead. So I hope that you value this as much as I did. Let's close this out. You can learn more about the buying and selling of land at National Land